Canada found itself on the brink of civil war due to Donald Trump's attempts to conquer the country, but it turned out that internal forces had begun to actively destabilize Canada. It turned out that there is a whole separatist movement in Canada advocating for the secession of the province of Alberta from the country and the declaration of this territory as independent. And it turns out that the leaders of the Canadian separatists regularly hold meetings with the American political elite at the White House and the United States State Department. And Donald Trump could help this separatist movement actually start a real civil war in Canada. And this is where things get most dangerous, because while the Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, is resisting more and more of Donald Trump's tariffs, separatist leaders have said they plan to impose restrictions. To appeal to the United States government, specifically the Treasury Department, with a request for a $500 billion line of credit for, quote, supporting the transition to a free and independent Alberta. This seems especially dangerous given Donald Trump's strong desire to annex Canada to the United States. In this episode, we'll discuss what's happening in Canada and how dangerous it is. This separatist movement seems to be supported by the White House. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave your comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, yet another territorial dispute is shaking the already complicated relationship between the United States and Canada. And this isn't the result of Donald Trump's threat to turn the northern neighbor into the 51st state. This week, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney once again called on Donald Trump to respect Canada's sovereignty. After the Financial Times reported that representatives of the United States State Department have already met 3 times since April last year with leaders of a group advocating for the separation of Alberta province from Canada. The group, calling itself the Alberta Prosperity Project, is seeking to hold a referendum on Alberta's independence and its secession from Canada, according to a leader's statement. It plans to approach representatives of the United States Department of the Treasury with a request for a $500 billion line of credit to support the transition to a free and independent Alberta. Although the White House immediately stated, quote, that administration officials meet with a number of civil society groups, there is no support for this. Nevertheless, these reports sparked a new wave of anger in Canada, which is trying to demonstrate, on the contrary, unity in opposing the Trump administration's tariffs and threats against its territory. For example, the head of British Columbia, which is a neighboring province, compared the actions of this group from Alberta to treason. Mockery. Let's pause here to explain something. Alberta is an oil-rich province in Western Canada, and about 5 million people live in this province. Alberta has a unique political and cultural identity, shaped by its strong energy and agricultural sectors, commitment to economic individualism, and relatively low taxes. Compared to the rest of Canada, Alberta, often called the energy province, has oil sands that account for about 84% of all crude oil production in Canada. Politically, Alberta is considered a stronghold of conservatism in Canada, although its urban centers like Calgary and Edmonton are more progressive, and this is where the danger begins. The Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, maintains friendly relations with Donald Trump and many Republicans from the Make America Great Again movement. And she has even visited Donald Trump's private club, Mar-a-Lago, against the backdrop of threats from the United States to take over Canada, which looks very strange. For their part, separatist-minded residents of Alberta have long believed that their interests are not adequately represented in Ottawa. The main complaint is that the province lives off oil production, while the Canadian federal government enacts climate change laws that hinder the development of Alberta's oil industry. In addition, the province complains that it sends more money to the centre than it gets back, and also complains that they are conservatives while the rest of Canada is liberal, so they don't see eye to eye. And right now, as you know, the Liberals are in power in Canada. Although it should be acknowledged that the alienation of Canada's western regions has existed since the time of Confederation and certainly since Alberta became a province in 1905, It's not new. In the modern world, Alberta has usually opposed most decisions. In Ottawa, the quarantine measures introduced by the federal government due to COVID-19 and more than a decade of Liberal rule in Ottawa have only accelerated this process. And the tension only increased as the rest of Canada united in such patriotic opposition to Donald Trump. Here, Alberta stands apart in this regard, and this is where things get really interesting. After the victory of Liberal Mark Carney on the wave of anti-Trump sentiment last year, the Alberta legislature passed a law simplifying the organization of a referendum on the province's independence. This was a clear response to the central government. You chose the Liberals? Fine, then we'll separate. On the other hand, it should be acknowledged that the separatist movement does not have a leader or a structured campaign, and currently none of the separatist political parties have seats in the Alberta legislature. Nevertheless, the question arises, why do Alberta separatists sympathize so much with Donald Trump, who calls Canada the 51st state of America? He says that this territory needs to be taken over, and in general, he clearly does not show respect for this country. And it's all about oil. Donald Trump is first of all a conservative, and secondly, he supports the development of the oil industry. What more could you want? For example, last summer at rallies in Alberta, you could see Make America Great Again slogans, but the sign didn't say Make America Great Again, it said Make Alberta Great Again, meaning let's make Alberta great again. And since then, there have been more and more of these kinds of rumors. Two movements have emerged. Some want Alberta to be fully independent, while others want it to become the 51st state of the United States of America. And these sentiments are being fueled by officials from Donald Trump's team. For example, last week, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, stated directly that Alberta is a natural partner for the United States of America. Here's a quote. "Listen, they have huge resources. The people of Alberta are very independent, and I've heard about a possible upcoming referendum. People want sovereignty. They want what the United States of America has. Canada will never allow Alberta to build a pipeline to the Pacific Ocean. I think we should let them build a pipeline to the United States of America." And now there are already reports that this fall, Alberta may actually hold a referendum on whether Alberta should remain part of the Confederation. Let me remind you, the last time such a referendum was held, there was in 1995, and back then, the supporters of keeping the province as part of Canada had the majority. But honestly, it was a small margin. You can't really say there was a huge gap. On the other hand, public opinion polls now show that support for Alberta's independence is relatively low. A sociological survey in January showed that only 19% of Alberta residents expressed their support for separation. Well, that's why experts suggest that all these separatist sentiments may be Alberta's attempt to send a threatening signal to the authorities in Ottawa. Nevertheless, the Trump administration is also trying to play on this topic in order to somehow shake up the situation. That's why we see that Donald Trump's administration is not giving up, and I think this will continue throughout the rest of Trump's presidency. They will still try to put pressure on Canada in order to destabilize it as much as possible, and then say that the only salvation is in Washington. So let's be friends and do things the way we want, which of course is very hard to call friendship. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Friends, if you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or subscription through the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it clearly says support the channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you give. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.